Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, and whether you were having family over or not, obviously it's the time of year when everybody thinks about family, maybe even more so than usual. Really from Thanksgiving, I guess, on obviously through the new year, it seems like it's just a time when people are, we should be focused on our family all the time, of course, but some people, whether it's because of distance or relationships or stepchildren or step-parents or step-grandparents or whatever the situation is, sometimes in the world we live in now, we certainly know that the world simply is not as small as it used to be. Used to, everybody, when you moved away from home, you moved to a different part of the same little town. You moved down the block. Now there's a few people that are still that way, but when I moved out, I moved 1,000 miles from home. Still that way after 36 years, and so you don't just get together any old time you want to physically. However, in terms of communication, of course, it's so easy now to stay in touch with people and FaceTime and meet, social media and texting and calling and all the things we have now that has still been able to keep the family together as the family is kind of split apart. And one of the things I want to talk about this morning, Brother Houston was going to teach this morning. He didn't tell me what his selected message was going to be for Youth Sunday, but when he had, we had something come up, obviously with the family matter that he couldn't get here, I thought, well, for Youth Sunday, I don't normally teach that lesson, of course, but it's totally appropriate for those of us who are older to celebrate Youth Sunday. Number one, we used to be youth, right? I mean, and compared to some people, almost every one of us can say, well, I'm younger than so-and-so. And I have a good friend that was born like 9 days before me. I used to work with her many years ago. We stayed in touch, and I can always give her a hard time for being older than me. It's only 9 days, but still, you can legitimately say, okay, that person is my elder, right? Doesn't mean that they're a family member, but it does mean they're older than you are, at least in terms of physical age. So I look at it like there's two different parts of the equation. There's really more than two, but there's two main parts of the equation of a Youth Sunday. Part of it is the youth, what the youth should be hearing from the elders, and part of it is what the elders should be remembering about what to do for the youth. So it works both ways. It's not just, okay, kids, obey your parents and, love God and go to church. I mean, that's kind of the boilerplate thing that some people would say, well, that's really inspiring the kids to do the right thing and to be, good members of the church and good Christians and all, but it's, it's pretty superficial. But number one, there's a ton of things that the kids or younger people need to be doing. And again, young is relative. I mean, I'm younger than some here. I'm older than some. It just depends on, again, who you're comparing yourself to in terms of age as to whether or not you feel like you're youthful or young or old or elderly or senior or whatever word we want to use. And so, I look at it like the Bible, of course, is a book of instruction. Now, it's really a book of instruction and inspiration, if you will, and it's also a book of history, and it weaves all those things together to give us a roadmap for what we're supposed to do. That's what the Bible gives us. Otherwise, God wouldn't have still made it possible for us to still have it. And so for us to go out and say, okay, what can we learn about these family matters, if you will, through the church? Now, of course, the church is full of examples of different generations of families, whether it was Abraham's or King David or whatever. There's all these different, lineages and genealogies involved, but that's not really, that history, if you will, of course, is the framework of human history in the Bible, in biblical history, but it's not really so much on an individual level what we're supposed to glean from it about how to instruct family and how to take instruction from family, because both those things are important. And it really starts way back there. I mean, if we go to even back to Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 6 is one of the places where we really find out, we start to see what God wants, how the family to operate, if you will. So we'll go through some of this. I'm going to go into Deuteronomy chapter 6. Again, this is right after the delivery of the Ten Commandments, which of course part of the Ten Commandments is honor thy father and mother, okay? So I want to go to chapter 6. It says, now these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments, which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that ye might do them in the land whither you go to possess it. This is, approaching, the promised land after all this time, is that it's finally almost pretty much right in front of them, but it does not come without a set of instructions. It's what to do, as you take this land that I have given you out of, not through anything you deserve, but because you're my chosen people, I will deliver. If you will follow my commandments, I'm going to deliver this land to you. So it says in verse 2, that thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee, thou and thy son and thy son's son, all the days of thy life, and that thy days may be prolonged. Sometimes we don't think about the Bible having instructions for grandparents, but it does in several places. It references to your sons and your sons' sons, and your children and their children. There's a very masculine voice, of course, to the Bible in general. That is the way the world was back then. When it talked about sons, it doesn't, maybe it says sons and daughters in places. It may say daughters or children as opposed to sons. But in general, that society, all through those thousands of years, it was a male-based society. So we don't necessarily look at it when we say mankind. Mankind to me means everybody. Now, if you're a feminist today, mankind is some evil word because it doesn't say humankind. It doesn't say womankind. It just says mankind. Well, you can get bogged down in that stuff if you want to. Everybody knows what it means. Mankind means people, right? Little girls, old men, everything in between. That to me is just what it's talking about. So when it says in here sometimes sons and sons and children, it's really written in the way it was because of the way society was. However, we can all look at it and say, we understand that it means teach your children well. It doesn't just mean teach your son and forget your daughter. It doesn't mean that at all. It means every generation needs instruction, just like we all did. Now, I can sit here and say, well, if it wasn't for my dad's mother, I don't know how much I'd have been in church when I was a kid. It wasn't that my family wasn't Christians and all, but my parents had to work a lot. They couldn't always take us to church. We weren't old enough to drive, but my grandmother would always go. And she was a teacher of beginners, and so I got a lot of my foundation from her. I didn't get it as much from my mother because of circumstances. It wasn't my mother wasn't opposed to it. She was thrilled that my grandmother was able to take this. So sometimes it's not just the parent and the child and saying, okay, well, once I've had kids and they've had kids, what's out of my hands? It's really not. As long as we're here, we're supposed to continue to instruct and to guide and to teach. And it doesn't mean that just those of us who are, have a teacher by our name in the church directory, that's not what it means either. Every parent is to teach. And in my case, I think every step parent is to teach. I have no blood children of my own. I never have, but I feel like, okay, well, Catherine's son is my responsibility to be some kind of a guide, hopefully, and to their kids. My stepson also has an adopted son. Now, I don't even know what that makes him to me, but from my standpoint, he's just still a grandson. Okay, now he's a step grandson, or I don't know what you'd call it in human terms, but it doesn't make any difference. That is that next generation beyond my stepchild and his wife. Okay, so you could get really bogged down in all this and say, okay, well, this isn't my job because it isn't defined in the Bible as saying anything about stepchildren or step-grandchildren or adopted or anything like that. No, but it doesn't need to. God gave us the common sense to know what it means, right? It means to teach your children, whether it says sons or stepkids or anything like that, you're still supposed to instruct them in the ways of the Lord. Right. Okay? So, verse verse 3, Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath promised thee, in the land that floweth with milk and honey. Go forth and multiply is really what it meant. I mean, it meant to go. It's a good thing to go out and to have children and to increase your number and to inhabit this land of milk and honey that I'm about to give you here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God was one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them upon the post of thy house and on thy gates. Now, we could go on through all this, this whole chapter, but it makes the point, I think, that we are responsible for the instruction. Mm-hmm. You can't just say, oh, well, I gave my kid a Bible when they got christened when they were 3.5 months old, or whatever some people do, and it's on them now to find God. I don't see that anywhere. Mm-hmm. To me, it's on us to help them. There's a difference between what some people say, well, I just want to raise good kids. Well, that's good, literally, but we should want to raise godly kids. Right. There's a difference between good and godly. There's a whole world of good people. They're driving down the road out here right now. Yeah. Quote, good by human standards. Nobody is good by God's standards. We know that. Only Jesus was and is. And so, for us to say, okay, well, my job is to raise a good citizen. To help raise a good citizen of heaven eventually, but that takes godliness, not just goodness. There's a whole world that's confused about that. And so it's not to say that, oh, I'm godly because I'm saved. That in and of itself doesn't, godly pretty much just means, like God. Well, that's pretty high bar to jump, right? I don't think any of us could say, okay, well, I follow the 10 Commandments and I'm saved, I'm a good person, so therefore I'm godly. Well, the goal is to become as godly as we can in our walk. But the goal also is to teach our children to become godly. And when it says children here, again, and it does say that here, not just sons, it just says all of them. And I think it's common sense tells us that we are to help our children raise their children. And there's some in here that I think probably are great-grandparents. I know there's several of you that are, not just grandparents, and they're great-great-great-grandparents sometimes. And so you say, well, is it their responsibility? I think as long as they're within your, quote, house, and your house doesn't just mean where you live on the corner of the Elm and Maple Streets. That your house is your family in a way, okay? And as long as you're in a position, God's blessed you to be in a position to help and to set a good example is a huge part of it. We know that. Because you can talk all day long to kids or grandkids or anybody else or the neighbor kid, but if what you say and what you do are two different things, we know which one they're going to follow. Amen. And so there's a lot here, and there's more than we'll get into. But I want to jump into Deuteronomy 30 while we're in Deuteronomy. Let's just go to Deuteronomy 30 real quick here, and I'm going to just look at verse 2 or verse 1 and 2. And it shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations, whether the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shalt obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children, with all thine heart and with all thy soul. That then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. So he's talking, he's saying, look, these things, good things will happen but you gotta follow these instructions. Good things will happen if you do this, and if you do this, not just you, but your children. And again, are we responsible? There's a question, in legal terms, if I have a 14-year-old that goes out and holds up a bank, I'm responsible legally because that child is still a minor. Now, we could argue that 14 today is not what 14 was when we were kids. In terms of worldliness, in terms of being able to get into trouble, in terms of having the tools, if you will. Maybe they're not tools, maybe there's something else, but ways to understand and reach out and see what's going on in the world. Television by itself would do that. And they're not even watching television now because they're all on the internet. Well, the internet's even worse. So we understand that, there are many distractions and things out there that did not exist back in biblical days that are extra burdens and challenges and hurdles for us to try to get over to continue to, send the right message to kids and grandkids and, sons and daughters and just everyone, of course, whether we're related to them or not, we're supposed to set a good example. But we have particular duty to do so within our own family. So I'm going to go from there to Ephesians 6, and this is kind of a classic place where everybody, I guess, would teach from when they're talking about a youth Sunday or something like that. But let's see if I can get over here. Go to Ephesians 6 and that will be verses 1 through 3. Again, we all know this, and this is kind of what drives home the idea that that it works both ways. Children and parents. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. That's the only reason you have to do it. It's right. And when God says it's right, that is right. Somebody can tell you, oh, this is the right thing to do, but they're not God. Now, God might be telling them to tell you that because the Spirit has told them to relay that to you. It's not that people tell you the wrong thing all the time. Many times they tell you the right thing. But it's not right because they thought so. It's right because it's right in the eyes of God. And so, of course, God will use messengers, if you will, and people to put in your life to help you make decisions and to show you the way. But it's not their way. Hopefully, it's God's way. And they are just relaying that like a pipeline. Hey, I'm a pipeline between here and here. My job, God's telling me to tell this person, to give them some instruction, to give them some encouragement, to give them some support of some kind that will help them along the way. And so it works both ways. Hopefully we're all helping each other all the time, right? So it says in verse 2, this is where it comes back the other way. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. In other words, it is the first of the 10 commandments in which it says, if you do this, this will happen. And of course it says in the 10 commandments, honor thy father and mother to prolong thy days. Okay? Now, so that's what it means there by promise. It said in verse 3, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. Of course, it gets down into other parts. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. What does admonition mean? It means you don't judge them, but you need to discipline your children. We know that. That's just, it says that many times. I think Proverbs is the main place we think of it, saying, use the rod on them if they misbehave and it won't kill them, so it's a good thing. The old saying, hey, if it doesn't kill you, it just makes you stronger. Well, that's kind of where that comes from. Don't beat your kids to death with a rod. You're not supposed to do that. We know there's idiots out there that do it. We look in the newspaper every day. There's somebody out there that, stomped on a 4-month-old baby. I mean, there's crazy people, whether it's drugs or something else causing it. There's a lot of evil out there. And yet, here is just saying, teach your children well. And part of that, of course, is set a good example. Amen. Then you turn around on the other side and say, kids, behave and pay attention and do what your folks tell you to do. Now, I think we all see examples. We've all lived with them. I know my stepson right now they got 3 kids, and the girl is just typical 17-year-old girl. You know, the more they have when they grow up, have you noticed the more they have, the more they want? Mm-hmm. Now, I'd be the first one to say there was a lot of stuff I wanted as a kid too, but I think I understood from my parents why I couldn't have all of it. Now, that's not to say, and my granddaughter is by no means, a rare example of what I'm talking about. I mean, the best way to get a kid to do something is to say, whatever you do, don't do this. Sounds like, and I'm not putting that back on Eve in the garden, but that was the first, you can do anything you want to do, but don't do this one thing. Oh, I have to do that one thing. It must really be good. So that's just, again, human nature, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that is man's sinful nature saying, finding a reason to go against God. Well, here's the thing, if you say, like it says there, and I won't read it farther in Ephesians 6, but again, kids watch what we do. Grandkids watch what you do. And you can say, oh, I've got the Lord's Prayer up here on a little macrame on my wall in a frame, and it's Grandma's house is such a nice place. But if Grandma's not really walking the walk, it doesn't matter what's on her wall.
That's right.
Exactly. That's just idle words, if you will. So, and by the same token, it doesn't mean you have to have that stuff to walk the walk.
That's right.
I mean, way better to live it and not just put up all these big signs about it. How many people are wearing a cross around their neck today? How many people got cross tattoos on their body? There's a lot of them. Okay, but that cross right there doesn't mean, that's just a symbol. But if you don't live it, the symbol is meaningless. So, that's not to find fault with this or that or the other. I'm not to judge it, but I am. But when it says in here, you must nurture and admonish. Nurture means raise up. Feed and water them. If you will, like a plant, that's how you nurture a plant. It's also really how you grow your kids and grandkids. But you don't just give them food and something to drink. You have to give them spiritual food along with that, and you have to be a vessel that helps relay that spiritual message and conduct, so that they will see that not only, what you follow, but why you follow it, and that it's genuine. If it's not genuine, they'll see right through that. We know that. So, that puts a great responsibility back on parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, anybody, any older person within a family, but it could also be talking about your next door neighbor too. I mean, if you're not walking the walk and you end up being a bad example and they're watching you too, kids in church, at the grocery store, anywhere you go, I mean, you're supposed to be a good example. And even if you're not really responsible directly for their well-being and growth, nonetheless, God wants us to walk the walk for everybody. Mm-hmm. And if they're doing the same thing, then we feed each other. We all get tighter as a Christian community if we all are trying to do the right thing all the time. And again, not dumping this off on somebody else. Can't, I don't care if it's online or in this classroom or anywhere else, Christian school, public school, you name it. You can't just depend on say, okay, well, I dropped my kid off at 8:41 this morning in front of the school. It's not on me what happens to them. That's why we pay teachers. That's why we have principals. That's why we have taxes going to schools. Well, they can teach them some things, but they're not going to teach them the things a parent or grandparent could teach them.
That's right.
They need to not teach the opposite of that, which is one of the problems we have today, is that they're being taught everything but that. Mm-hmm. And they're being taught, I mean, you look around and you see the liberal nature of the education system, maybe not in the school your kid's going to or grandkids, but I guarantee you there's a ton of them out there. And the liberal teachers are passing along. You see how effective it is when you're a teacher. If they can pass along the wrong thing, as they're doing clearly by watching the news now, then that means that we can influence them in the right way, but we have to do it. And we have to do it in a way that not only will influence them positively, but will help them withstand what they're hearing from everybody else. You know, you go to a class, even when I was in college in the 70s, if I were to bring up something I brought up something in an English class one time about, there was a poem or something we were reading about, and it said some unforgivable sin. Well, I was the only one in the class that said, well, here's what, you know, the Bible said is the only unforgivable sin, which was the blaspheming the Holy Spirit. And people from, you know, this was back in Texas, well, all the city kids are like, well, what's this guy talking about? And, you know, so it would have been real easy not to say that in class, but, you know, I felt like that's what I was supposed to say because that's what the Bible says. Now, I don't know if that influenced anybody or not. Certainly I didn't have any of my kids or grandkids or anything like that in the class with me, but I felt like it was my duty to say that when the guy wanted comments about what that meant. So, you know, that's part of what we're supposed to be doing all the time, is looking for opportunities to spread what the Bible says, but also not to just say it, but also to try to walk it. And that is the hardest part of all. It's hard to say it in public, but it's even harder to keep doing it in a way that people will be lifted up by it and learn from it and draw closer to God, or have a chance to do that. It's still on them to decide. So I'm going to go from here to, real quickly, I'm going to jump over to 1 Peter 5:5. Again, there are a lot of places in here where, you know, we could argue that, you know, any one of these family stories in the Bible is a story that hopefully inspires us to be good teachers, and not just good teachers, but good students. I mean, my mother is still alive. Now, she has dementia, she's not doing very well or whatever, but, you know, that's part of her being 84 and having some dementia symptoms, and she's 1,000 miles from here, but yet if she picks up the phone or reaches out to me on Facebook and tells me to do something or not do something, I'm going to pay attention. Still my mother, you know. Doesn't matter if she's really fully capable of being in charge of herself all the time, taking care of herself. She's still my mother, okay? So that's just, you know, things change, and over time we realize that it's, you know, it used to be I was looking up to older people. Well, now I'm one of the ones that hopefully younger ones are looking up to now. And so for me, it's a matter of understanding that I'm just part of this continuum. My generation is neither better nor worse than the one before or after. You know, we're all just people. Same things we deal with today, they dealt with back in Deuteronomy. They were dealing with here in 1 Peter. There's human problems and human challenges and situations. It's still on parents to lead their kids in the right way. I want to go to 1 Peter 5:5, as I mentioned. Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility, for God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. That's basically where it says we're all supposed to help each other. You know, you could say, well, that's so-and-so's kid. It's not on me to tell them the right way to go. If God puts you in a position to help them, maybe you're not the one that's supposed to whip them if they start squalling in church. Maybe that is on their parents. It's on whatever adult brought them to church. But basically when it says, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder, all the younger people are supposed to respect and look up to and learn from the older people. That's part of how society is supposed to work. That's how we continue and build on knowledge through the generations, and hopefully mankind gets stronger and closer to God as a result of that, not gets farther away. But we see many examples which it went the other way. It said, be subject one to another and be clothed with humility. If we could just learn to do that and show that to our kids and grandkids and everyone around us, then the world we know would be a better place. God giveth grace to the humble. Humility, of course, is just something we don't see much of these days, because people think, well, I've got to look out for myself. And if I don't speak up, if I don't look out for me first, then who's going to? Well, God's going to, right. You know, but we're not supposed to think that we're powerful or have real control over our lives. We're supposed to submit ourselves to God so that He can work through us. Okay? And the last place I'm going to go is 1 Timothy, and I'm going to go to chapter 5. Again, very familiar scriptures here when we're talking on this subject. 1 Timothy 5, rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren. So don't look down at the younger ones. I mean, just consider them to be one of you. You know, that will not only help you stay rooted in remembering that your duties to the next generation, it will help them to feel included and that they matter and that you have respect for them even though they're younger than you are. That's hard to do sometimes. You know, you look around and you say, well, you know, these people don't know anything. They're not old enough. They haven't been through some of the things I have. They don't know this, but you have to constantly be able to put yourself back in their place. You know, we once were that age. We once were younger than them. We once didn't even exist. And so that's the hard thing sometimes, is not to just kind of grow out of it, if you will, as the way you were as a youth. We're supposed to grow and learn, yes, but we're also supposed to, as quickly as possible, become a productive member of society, and also, as we do that, to continue to respect those who are older than us. I'm going to go to verse 2. The elder women as mothers, the younger as sisters, with all purity. Honor widows that are widows indeed. But if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Now, what that really means is, you know, we hear that the church's job, the deacon's job, is to take care of the widows and orphans. We do believe that. But there's a difference in a widow who is truly widowed and has no support, no other family, and a widow that has a whole bunch of family left, just not a husband. It is on those younger nephews and nieces and family to take care of that widow. Okay? Don't just dump her on the church. That, well, she's a widow. You know, good luck. See you later, Aunt so-and-so, whatever. I mean, have a good life. I mean, it's on us. That's family. It's on us to take care of them. That's right. Don't just, I'm not saying the church doesn't have anything to do with them or doesn't help them where it can, but there is a difference between a truly lone widow and a widow with family. And it says it right here, you know, it's on them to show piety at home and to requite their parents, which basically means repay. Well, we all owe our parents something. You may say, well, my dad was a drunk and he left home when I was 2 and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's still, you wouldn't be here without him, you know. And it's not on us to judge them. We don't know what they were dealing with. And so we're to repay them for what they have done for us. And that's what it says here. That is good and acceptable before God. And that's another way of saying, if we don't do it, it's not good or acceptable before God. I mean, sometimes what we have to remember is the meaning not only is what it says, but the opposite is also telling us something too. It is good and acceptable before God to do these things. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it right there. I mean, it's, you know, we could talk a long time about, you know, educating and teaching the young and raising them in the way that we should. And I realize that we haven't. It's not like we got a youth Sunday full of kids here that are, you know, that are all, you know, trying to find instruction. But we all have them in our families somewhere. Could be a niece, could be a nephew, could be a step-grandson like mine. You know, there's all these different situations. But still, family is family. And in the end, it is on the older ones to teach the younger ones the way to go. And avoid teaching them the way not to go. That's part of it too. And don't just talk about it, but actually show that you love them. Show that you love others. And they will hopefully, you know, through prayer, your prayer and their prayer, they will come closer to God as a result of it. So, hope y'all got something out of that.